I will wait. I will wait. Or you can fool me. I will wait.
You're listening to Grace, Geltman, and Weld on the Hammer Factor. Take it away, boys.
Can we just talk about this on the show?
Sure, we'll get back to it here
Let's just go right now into the show and pick up where we left off. People can see a little glimpse of what's like behind the scenes here.
Okay. All right, let's go right into it. Do you want me to do introductions first, or do we want to just jump right into this?
The pre-show time is sacred, man. You can't be just tossing that in there willy-nilly.
No, but this topic is what I'm talking about right here.
Well,
we should put Hammer Factor on like Patreon, and if you pay like $5 an episode, you can listen to the pre-show banter.
Right.
On that, welcome to episode number 35 of the Hammer Factor, the end of the year episode. My name is John Grace. Thanks for listening. My co-host on the line here, we have North Fork champion, policy director for the Outdoor Alliance, and Ryan Zeke's whipping boy. Let's hear it for Louis Geltman.
Right.
Howdy.
Also on the line, we have the outspoken owner of Immersion Research, whitewater legend, and unicycling enthusiast. Getting ready to head to Peru. How's it going, fellas?
Good. Here we are again. Weren't we just here like 15 minutes ago?
It kind of feels like that, but we would have another episode if it was not for you and your gallivanting around the world.
Well, I have to get on a plane and get sick.
Yeah. So where are you headed? What's going on? I hear that there's a Peruvian vacation in your future.
Yeah. Taking the fam to Peru. I went there a few years ago on a kayak trip. We did the, what did we do? The Pacoratambo. Gelman, did you do that river? Pacoratambo?
We did.
Yeah. It's a fun river.
It was low when we were there. I see how it could get quite rowdy with more water, but it was pretty mellow when we were there.
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't like super extreme whitewater, but it was a really nice run.
So, like the team beer guys, like Ben Luck and the Clamas, those guys came back and were like, the Pacoratambo is like just top of the list, sick all time. And for those guys to say that, I think it must have just been like Richter when they were there. It was not the highlight of my trip down there, I would say.
Anyway, boys wanted to go back, and now I'm taking the family.
And where are you going?
We're going to go to Cuzco, hang out, do Machu Picchu, and then I think we're going to go surfing up north.
Nice. Good for
Really
you.
sick, man.
Yeah.
And
looking forward to it.
Louis, you're still in D.C. What's the news? What's going on up there?
Not much. Before the holidays, just had a bunch of stuff to do last week and kind of just hanging out at the office this week. Catch up with the fam and all the high school friends, and yeah, good to be here.
All right. Well,
can we talk about what we're talking about the 2 seconds before the show started?
Yeah, we can get into that. And Louis, can you phrase your question again? But first, let me get into our top of the show sponsor.
Oh, all right.
Now, a huge shout out to Canoe and Kayak. Canoe and Kayak is our first ever sponsor. Canoe and Kayak has been leading the paddle sport media hustle for 45 years, reaching an unprecedented audience of nearly 500,000 people, with in-depth articles like the one discussing pushing the limits of 9-foot kayaks, which I'll put a link to in the show notes, and I passed over to you guys. There's no more compelling way to get your paddle sports beta than Canoe and Kayak. Check them out at canoekayak.com. Back to what we were talking about in the pre-show. What were we talking about?
We were talking about the new Playboat that Liquid Logic, Shane, I guess we used to Liquid Logic, it's not like exclusively a Shane Benedict project, put out. I saw it at Golly Fest, and it looked like it looked like a session plus to me with like foot bumps. A longish, cartwheely, slicey looking Playboat, not a looping Playboat.
Looks strangely compelling for somebody who does
for
not
Playboats. Like my go-to boat is the Session Plus. I still have one that's pretty much in mint condition.
Ooh.
But we were talking about how Jordan seems to be the sole recipient of these boats.
Jordan is probably the highest paid freestyle kayaking athlete out there.
We should say freestyle
Is that true?
running athlete, not a kayaker.
I mean, Do you know any other paddler that has that much access to that many boats that are solely theirs?
That's a good point.
I mean, with all due respect to Jordan, he's a C1er too.
This is what we were talking about pre-show,
Yeah.
and what I can't wrap my head around is like you can't have a C1er prototyping a kayak. Like it's not. You take a boat and make it the way a C1er wants it. It's not going to be a good kayak. It's like your legs aren't in front of you. You're sitting higher. It's just different. You know, there's a reason why in slalom.
C1 almost extinct.
Well, that, but like also like if you look at like slalom,
I'm sorry, Jordan.
actually designing C1s, designing
Jordan, I'm so
kayaks,
sorry.
C1s and the kayaks are different, you know?
I want custom boats for different rivers that I go to. How do I
Me
make
too.
that happen?
You want like a quiver of boats.
I want
like
a quiver of
15,
my
20
own
different
boats. Yes, that no one else gets but me, and I get to.
And they
show up
get
with
maybe
them.
swapped out every year or so. You get 5 or 6 new boats for whatever you're into that year.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking for.
Is Liquid Logic going into production with this boat or not? Have you heard anything more about this?
So
Shane was
back-
on the fence about it when I talked to him about it.
Well, so back to talking what Lewis was talking about earlier. I put a comment on his Facebook feed, and you can see Shane posted a picture of the boat on his Facebook, so you can go there and check that out. But I said, is this going to be a boat that everybody gets to use, or is it just for Jordan? And he said it's going to be out in spring, so it'll be available in the spring.
My
If I had
Shane,
$1 million, I would have like my own boat design shop, and I would have like BDP or somebody who you could pay like $8 an hour to like sand your plugs down, and I would go in and be like, add like 2 inches of Bondo here, sand it down to 600 grit, and I'll be back tomorrow and tell you what other changes I want. And I would have my own kayaks designed by me, made by somebody.
I mean, my question is why don't they take the time and energy and design a BRAP for women and smaller people? You know, people in the 130 to 140 pound weight range. You know what I mean? Because it's frustrating that if you weigh 140 pounds, you're never going to paddle a boat as good as a BRAP. Because I shouldn't. It just seems like, you know, they're like, we did the BRAP and now we're kind of bored of it. We're going to go on to the next thing before they've really, I think, fleshed out the BRAP as a fully formed idea, which would mean at least making 2 versions of it, right? And not a crappy last minute Me Too small boat like most of these small boats are, but one that has as much R&D and time put into it as the original, right?
No,
I think if you weighed 140 pounds, the BRAP would be sick, man. You could, especially like the party BRAP. If you weighed 140 pounds, you could run anything in that thing.
No, but like a boat like that performs the same way the BRAP performs for you.
I
hear
wish
you.
I were lighter.
Hey, I've been asking for a
I wish I
BRAP.
were lighter in that boat, but
I've been asking for a BRAP family since the BRAP came out, but.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's
Anyway, we love the party BRAP. Moving on. This email comes at us from Fred Morrison and Nelson Jones, and this is a good one. Gentlemen, I like this. He starts it with, go ahead, Lewis.
oh, I don't know. I was just waving at Kara in the background.
This starts out, this is from Fred Morrison and Nelson Jones. I like the way he starts this out. Gentlemen and Weld, after listening to yesterday's episode of Hammer Factor, I really wanted to hear Lewis do a Mythbusters on this whole land deal in the West. I really appreciate Lewis's honesty in calling out the hyperbole with Patagonia's message on their website. Living in rural Colorado, our local friends have shared a variety of views, from siding wholly with Patagonia, as well as some sharing the lovely feature from the illustrious Glenn Beck.
he had a link there to a Glenn Beck.
Yeah, from a
Rant.
Glenn Beck rant, which started out with, I'll let Lewis get into that. We feel like a comprehensive shakedown of, number one, what this act will and will not do, and number two, what it could become and evolve into in years down the road, and finally, the likelihood of this litigation going through and doing what Trump is expecting this to do. It would be an excellent listen for the Hammer Factor community. So did you see this Glenn Beck video, Lewis? Did you have a chance to look at that?
I don't follow Glenn Beck links. Sorry.
Oh.
you should have said it was like Yvonne Chouinard, and then maybe I would have or something. But
Well, let's put this issue in the no spin zone, shall we?
Exactly. Let's
Set aside your cap as policy director for Outdoor Alliance and give us the complete straight
well,
note here.
I don't even have to set aside that cap, because I do think, to pat ourselves on the back here, for a sec. One thing that we try really hard to do is to be super honest about this stuff. Like, I think that there are a lot of conservation organizations that, in a well-meaning way, every single thing that happens is like the sky is falling, because they want to get people to, take action, get fired up, do whatever. And we make a very conscientious effort not to do that. Like, when we tell you, like, when you get something from OA and we're like, the sky is falling, it's because the sky is falling. And when it's like, a committee vote in Congress, and as important as that might be, if that's like step 1 in 10 opportunities to kill this thing, like, we're going to tell you that too. So I hope that we're not not doing too much hyperbole here. So, I think we talked about this a lot in the last show and probably several before that. But what Trump did was he, like, drastically scaled back the area on national public lands that are protected as national monuments. And so all the land before these designations were put in place, it was all federal public lands. There's no state land that's affected. There's no private land that's affected. This wasn't like taking land from Utah or taking land from anybody. This is land that belongs to all of us as Americans already. And what President Clinton did with Grand Staircase Escalante and what President Obama did with Bears Ears was basically change the way those areas were managed into a more protective management regime by declaring them as national monuments, which the president has the authority
Which
to do.
meant what? Like, if you live next to these things, how did that affect you? Like, you couldn't do what now that these designations had changed?
And
Principally,
in the Glenn Beck video, Glenn Beck starts it by saying all Trump did was allow you to walk on your public lands that you couldn't walk on before.
that's a outright lie. I mean, anyone was free to go to any of these places before they were monuments. They were free to go to any of these places once they were monuments, and they're still free to go to any of these places now. So the idea that there is some change in access regarding walking is totally false. I think from our perspective, principally what it did was stop oil and gas development and uranium mining in those areas and coal mining in Grand Staircase Escalante. It's mainly aimed at protecting the antiquities in those areas. So it's a lot of like sacred sites for Native Americans down there. There's a lot of like archaeological sites and artifacts and things like that. So mainly these protections are aimed at protecting those attributes of these places. But
I mean, before they were designated, could you snowmobile on them, but now you can't? Or could you four-wheel on them, now you can't? Or could you hunt on them, now you can't? I mean, people from that area maybe...
Hunting for sure you could do before and could still do as monuments. I think that there probably were some restrictions on motorized access that came with the monument designations.
Okay.
So where were we?
How about like grazing? How about if you had cattle and stuff like that?
So I believe that with both of those monuments, and I would have to double check on this, I think that all of the existing grazing got grandfathered in, but I think that it would probably preclude like a big ramp up in grazing, but I would have to check. But I'm sure that all the existing uses got protected.
Mm-hmm.
So if you should check out this, like, I don't know if I talked about this before. We should put this in the show notes. Levi Rose, who's our GIS analyst, put together this super sick story map using Esri, and you can see all the maps of these areas with like really good quality GIS tools, basically. But it kind of like walks you through, so you're not just like scrolling around on these maps trying to understand what this means on your own. And he could kind of like shows where all the climbing areas are, where the trails are, where I guess the artifacts piece is missing because you can't. It's a little problematic to show those kinds of things on the internet because then they end up getting looted. But you can kind of like see where the resources are, see where how the boundaries changed, one thing that's really crazy to look at is there's this long line of kind of like existing uranium claims that goes through Bears Ears. And so that's indicative of like a resource there that people want to develop. Like, and so by splitting Bears Ears into two smaller monuments, it's basically being done to facilitate uranium mining on this vein that kind of runs through what's the middle of this protected area right now. And similarly, where they're pulling back the eastern boundary, you can see where so the way oil and gas leasing works is industry nominates parcels that they would like to potentially lease. Like there's like an expression of interest to BLM, and then BLM potentially puts those leases up for sale. So when there's a potential oil and gas lease, that's because industry is already, sees that as a potentially lucrative area to develop. And there's nominated parcels that are basically being opened up by pulling back this boundary. So it's kind of being done to facilitate oil and gas development in a place that right now is protected from that.
So what are the like top 5 pieces of misinformation floating around about this piece of legislation? Like what's the,
I guess I don't have my finger to the pulse of that story as much as maybe I could, but I think one is the idea that in some way this was, these designations were taking private land or were exerting control over land that belongs to Utah and not all of us across the country. That's not true. These places, all of this dispute is over places that are nationally owned, nationally managed public lands, and they always have been. And the idea that Utah has some claim to these areas is like, it's just not, I understand the sort of sentiment that, locals know best and they're the voice that we should be listening to and how we manage these places. But that voice is always, always, always like a really important part of how, the conversation about how these places get managed. There's this idea that, there are these decisions that are being made by like bureaucrats in Washington, D.C., and the people who live in Utah don't have any say or their values aren't being reflected in management decisions. And it's just not true. It's like the Forest Service, the BLM, they're, geographically incredibly dispersed, and D.C. sort of sets high level policy. But in terms of on the ground decision making, it's being made by people in these field offices who are members of these communities, live in these places, send their kids to school with the kids of the ranchers. Like it's not somebody sitting in some office building in Washington, D.C. who's deciding how this is all shaking out in practice. I think just the idea that this is like the federal government versus the people who actually live there is it's not really accurate.
Real quick before we move on for Fred and Nelson here, can you SUP on the waters now, and could you before?
Is that according to our aesthetic preferences or just the law?
The law. Can you access the put in and takeouts of a river that's in these monuments before, and can you do it now?
Absolutely.
Can you go for a trail run now, just like you could then, or could you, or you can only do that now?
You could do that before it was a monument. You could do it when it was a monument. You could do it now, but now the chances that you might be running by some oil and gas derricks are substantially higher.
Can I personally mine for uranium on these properties?
Good question.
Probably easier to make that happen than you might think. Like hard rock mining is one of the most antiquated paradigms for how we manage public land. It's all governed by these mining laws from 1872, and it's fucking insane. It's like the same things that were, governing like the gold rush are how we manage hard rock mining on public lands now, and it's nuts.
Well, Fred and Nelson, I didn't finish their email. Thank you for all you guys do and spreading information for Outdoor Alliance and spreading the stoke of kayaking. Looking forward to the next episode, and we still hope you all might come to Paddle Fest in BV. Grace, we have T-shirts ready to ship.
But actually, you know what? I feel like I should touch on one other thing, which is like, I don't know, not to go too far down this rabbit hole, but as much as it's about the policy for these particular places, like it's easy to be like, like I don't really care about what's going on in Utah, but these are permanent protections, or these are intended to be permanent protections, and the idea that the president can just roll back these things because on a whim is insane. They launched this project of reviewing national monuments with the idea that, or giving it the window dressing, that the problem was that the last administration had done, inadequate public outreach on these things, which is a total falsehood. And they put this thing out for comment, and they got 2.8 million comments, like overwhelmingly, like 90+%, maybe 98%, I don't know, like supporting the existing national monuments. These things have an unbelievable amount of popular support. The Antiquities Act, like places like the Grand Canyon, that was originally designated as a national monument, and before it became a national park. Grand Teton, that was originally a national monument before it became a national park. Black Canyon of Gunnison, like super sick paddling run in Colorado, that was a national monument before it was a national park. Like there's a long history of these designations protecting places that matter, and the idea that we can just like roll these things back on a whim is like is a totally fucked precedent. Like that cannot stand. And there's more monuments on the list that they want to start making changes to, and it's just this is a big deal.
There you got it, right from the horse's mouth. Thanks for that, Lewis. Well, okay, we're going into a new year. So this is going to be our last episode before the new year. Because
this could be our last episode, period.
This legitimately could be our last episode, period, which I just want to throw it out to you guys. What do you guys want to see happen with the Hammer Factor? Is this it? Are we done?
I think if we're going to get rid of it, we should do it quickly. Just take it out in the yard, shoot it. Boom. Done.
I agree. I think if that's the course. 39, dude, 39 is a big deal. A lot of people don't make it to 4 podcasts.
Right.
So,
and we're starting to get hate mail. I mean, the hate mail's piling up.
We certainly have. We'll get into that here in a second. What do you think, Lewis? I mean, you guys have been with 90% of these podcasts. You got to throw some opinion out there.
Can we still have like a weekly conference call where we just tell each other we're idiots?
Lewis had a good idea where we do like a subscription service where if you pay a subscription, you could have special access to the pre-show. There'd have to be a waiver involved or something. I don't know.
A gag order along with it.
Yeah. No, honestly, I think we should keep going. I thought, Grace, when you talked about doing this last year, I was just like, sure, let's do it. I thought we'd run out of stuff to talk about in 2 episodes or 3 episodes, but we haven't, depending on who you ask.
I do think that there are topics that we could take out into the yard and shoot.
Yes, for sure. Yeah. I
think we could do it maybe like every other week, and speaking for myself, prepare a little bit more. Well, that might be helpful.
Well, in my head, I have like 10 things lined up that I want to talk about for future shows. Personally speaking, right. I mean, in all seriousness,
you should send them around. We should vet them.
Yeah, I can talk about Whitewater all day long. So anyway, I'm just saying, over the next few weeks, everybody's holiday, travel, blah, blah, blah. Just think about that.
What would you do if Hammer Factor was not in your life?
And let me throw it out to the listeners. What do you want to see? I should.
You sound like one of the an NPR pledge
That's
drive
right.
there.
How much is Hammer Factor worth to you? It's your time to sit down, relax, have a cup of tea, and listen to your friends of the Hammer Factor. How much is that worth to you?
All right.
Have you ever had a driveway moment with the Hammer Factor?
All right. Well, let me. Yeah.
All right. You want to keep going? You still run the stuff on the list here. You want to keep going on the list?
Yeah. Let's get on the list. What's going to happen with Whitewater Sup next year? Any predictions? It's blowing up at this point. I mean, are we at like peak Whitewater Sup, or is
yes?
Okay.
We should find a guest. Here's who I want to have on. We should find somebody who was like a professional rollerblader in the early 90s and talk about their career as a rollerblader and how, surviving the boom and bust of rollerblading. And then we could have like Dan Gavir or someone on and have a little like roundtable discussion about being involved in fad sports.
Dude, right. I can call Kramer Diddy right now. Do you guys want to get him on the phone? He's a professional rollerblader. And he was there through the whole boom and bust.
But this is more a longer conversation. We should save that one for another episode, but I think that's a good idea.
I think Whitewater Sup is going to continue its expansion, and play park kayaking will become more and more obsolete. That's my prediction.
Yeah, we're into the area of things which should be taken out in the Arden shot, I think.
So what about trends for the year? What did you see this year from your guys' perspective?
I think kids boating is going to be a thing. I've had more requests for kids gear in the past year than I have in the 18 years previous to that.
Yeah, it's a good sign.
I think it's a great sign.
I've seen a huge amount of youth interest here in the Southeast as well.
Yeah, so. I think that bodes well for our sport too, for sure.
Yeah. What about you?
I think activism is pretty hot right now.
What is?
Activism. I like that. I feel like people are...
That was Max Blackburn, Super Rep, calling me.
Should we patch him in?
Max Blackburn, Super Rep. Super Rep of the Northwest.
Yeah, I think fighting for public lands, fighting for rivers, it seems pretty hot right now.
What about personally? You guys got any New Year's resolutions?
I do have a New Year's resolution.
What's that?
My New Year's resolution is, I'm sure you guys feel this way. Like, you have friends who you think of as being like really good friends who you haven't talked to in like 6 months or a year or years. And I think my resolution for the New Year is to call one of those people like once a week. Like, don't you have a lot of people, like, I'm sure just now people are like coming into your mind who you're like, man, I wonder what that dude's up to,
That's a good resolution. What about you, Will?
I'm going to try and paddle west of the Mississippi next year.
Yeah, boy.
Middle Kings?
You know my thoughts on that.
I'm going to try and get this 12 weeks training plan done.
Gelman says no. I don't know. It's like a fetish I have. That's just a river that I've fantasized about for a long time.
Lewis, how would you hate on the Middle Kings? Dude, this is like a real separation point that we have.
It's kind of rude and nasty, and yeah, I kind of like it.
It's so manky? How can you say that the Middle Fork of the Kings River is manky?
There's just like sharp rocks in places where there shouldn't be sharp rocks, and they're kind of pointing in weird ways. And
my God, dude, that is
so boat abusive.
That's manky.
That's just 100% false. Like, that just is false. It's not right.
That's fake news. Do you think that's undermining everything Lewis is saying about the Antiquities Act and everything else?
I don't even want to go there. I don't know.
I went once and it was too low, and I need to go back and give it another shake because I respect your opinion on these matters, and I should go again. But I
don't start hiking if the river's below 1500 CFS. Don't start hiking.
Yeah, that was my mistake. It was real low when we went. It was like I left the Northwest the day after I took the bar exam, so it was like I couldn't go any earlier. Right?
Well, don't blame that on the river.
All right, I won't.
Well, let's do a little viewer mail. We got some good ones. Let's get into the ass whippings we received here. This is from Evan Shaw. If you put up the Zinky Sups t-shirt, I'll order 2. Current boring t-shirt does not live up to the great pod. Also, why the hashtag on the front? That no hashtag on the next shirt, please. People know how to prefix a hashtag in the off chance they ever need to prefix the hashtag. So let me tell you why I did that.
Well,
go ahead.
Evan, I haven't even seen these shirts yet, so I don't know what he's talking about.
I'm kind of with him on the hashtag, but
listen, this is why
defend himself.
This is why I put it on there. Number one, so many people communicate with us through the hashtag. Like, it'll show up. I'll get pinged with it. Like, somebody will just make a comment, blah, 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 Hammer Factor hashtag. I just want people to know that's an easy way to communicate with us. That was it. I wasn't trying to be cool. It's a collector's edition t-shirt. So, anyway, hashtag Evan Shaw. That's your answer, buddy.
We did get another T-shirt submission. Are we going to discuss that?
Is this the one?
We got 2 T-shirt submissions. One about Zinky, and another Hammer Factor shirt.
Hostage art one.
I don't have those. I don't have those in front of me. Go over those.
I was impressed with the X-Acto knife skills taken to craft that, but I'm not sure that's the winner.
No, and then Andrew Miller has some kind of art connection. I have to call Andrew to see what this is. But I mentioned Zinky water skiing on 2 baby coffins on Lake Powell. And he sent a picture of Zinky behind a motorboat that looks stalled out, getting ready to go water skiing. But instead of baby coffins, it looks like he's about to ski on Trump and somebody else. The graphic is too low res to see it. Did you see it?
I did see it.
I
Who
thought
was it? It was.
I thought it was.
Couldn't quite tell.
I couldn't tell either, but it was like the image he sent was like a favicon. It was like 6 pixels wide. So Andrew, if you're listening, send us a higher res picture so we can see that thing.
We need this Zinky sub shirt is getting made. I don't care what has to happen for that to happen.
All right,
You should put them on the IR website.
All right.
No,
I can do that.
we'll put them up. And what was the other T-shirt? I'm gonna put all the T-shirts up. I'll make a post.
We got to find his email because he wrote a really nice email and he sent the artwork too. Do you have that in front of you?
I don't have
It
it.
was
in
the
front
one
of
with
me.
the
Find it.
It was, I don't know, like 8 images of kayakers beatering.
Oh, that was yeah.
No, that was Eliza's.
Yeah. She sent that a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, I'm talking about the one that had like somebody on a piece of candy, kayaking on a piece of candy.
Oh yeah, the treat laying shirt.
Yeah, the treat laying shirt.
That was the one with the hostage art, I think.
Hold on, I'm looking this up. Oh, and it turns out Max wants to come on the show. He has something he wants to talk about.
Super Rec?
Super rep from the Northwest. Can we patch him in?
Yeah, bring him on. Bring him on.
Okay.
While we're getting him on, I want to go to our next email just to keep us moving along here. This is from Robert Fleischel. Robert says, tell Shane to rant on himself for not even having a production Playboat. Number 2, Lewis is sponsoring electrical tape on paddles but condemning duct tape. Let him know his doublespeak has been noticed. Number 3, episode 38, return the hammer factor to its old glory. The former were sluggishness and sponsors kind of take away from the show. Maybe it's been something else on the past few episodes, but they didn't resonate with me as much as the others. 38 is back on point.
Sluggishness.
Thank you. So I know
I
know what Robert's talking about here. So we had a whole lot of technical difficulties for 2, kind of 3 episodes, and there was a heavy-handed editing that I had to do. So like last episode, you really heard the conversations and whatnot. And the 2 before that, there were a lot of editing. So I think that's probably what was going on there. But I'm not sure.
But he likes it.
I'm not sure to thank Robert or not. But thanks, Robert. I'll move on until you find that, Mr. Weld.
I found it. I got it.
Okay, let's
Yeah,
bring it up.
it's Joseph Mayer, and he writes, "Hey guys, I'm going to cut right to the chase. I envisioned the shirt before the contest was announced. In fact, it came into full focus the moment Weld cracked the case regarding the rise in popularity to Close Grip. The very moment he uttered the words, quoting Evan Garcia, it helps with laying treats. The whole thing came into focus." Anyway, he gave us a shirt idea here that is lo-fi, DIY, sort of an 80s punk rock flavor. Let's see. It's did you guys see this?
I did. It's great.
I did, yeah.
It's sort of a ransom note type thing.
Yeah.
And he thinks it would be a good fit for the Long Creek Gangstas or any other outlaw paddler types. And he could be correct. We should get these on the website because we need public input. Just like the Bears ears, we need a public input on this decision.
We'll do that.
And
Can you?
Just like Bears ears, we've already prejudged the outcome.
So to be clear, we're having a T-shirt contest with the Hammer Factor. IR is going to chip in a free dry top hat. Whoever submits the winning thing, you could write. What's the email they're going to submit these to, Mr. Grace?
Hammerfactor@amongstit.com.
Right. If you send your T-shirt ID there, we're going to put them on whatever website we have or Facebook or however we do this, and we're going to get some people to judge them. We'll announce the day of judging in one of the upcoming episodes, and people can take a look at what we have, and we'll pick one.
Before we move to the next email, can you just kind of say the way you did, the way that he was just explaining, you said laying treats on that episode, because I know exactly what he was talking about.
I don't you said created because I had a certain level of just he kind of pinned it because I had a certain level of disgust about the whole thing. So
anyway, it was brilliant. Definitely going to make the highlight reel. I think for New Year's I'm just going to come out with a highlight of the best little clips and put that out there.
That should be our opening credit should be that.
Perfect.
Yeah, like Kornheiser does.
Yeah,
exactly. Jordan Yara says, so a topic suggestion, then clarification. Can the host clarify their thoughts on playboating? Is it they're not into the modern hull boats, just generally not into playboating, etc.? Love the show. By the way, thanks for making it, Jordan Yaris.
I mean, having lived through the playboating boom and had a playboat and playboated a bunch, and I think I think I have a handle on the shortcomings of that aspect of kayaking. I just feel like they're too uni-purpose, and unless you live in really the right kind of conditions, they're just not that much fun for the long term. And the other thing is, I pointed this out when we were talking about Cabo Day, but I think the explosion of playboating came from boats like the RPM and the Hurricane and these bigger playboats, and the tricks people used to do in them were amazing, but they're also really hard to do. But when you could pull it off, I thought it was badass. It was seriously badass. And I think they dumbed down these boats so much to make these tricks accessible to literally anybody. That was kind of where, in my opinion, things probably took a turn for the worse in that regard. But like you go back to the BRAP and you start like in the right place, I can throw ends in the BRAP. You know what I mean? And I can flat spin the BRAP on the right kind of wave. Not every single glassy wave, but on the right kind of wave, and that's where I think it's really cool.
There you go. I like that. Lewis, you got anything to add to that one?
I don't know. Playboating is just not for me.
Moving on, Rahul Subramanian. Do you think I said that right? This is from Rahul. He says, questions for Hammer Factor, specifically Mr. Grace. How can an East Coast whitewater kayaker prepare for running big water rivers on the West Coast, i.e. North Fork of the Payette, White Salmon, and Lochshaw? Number 2, can you talk about how you prepared for the Stikine? 2A, if possible, talk about the one-day descent that you did. Because that blew my mind. Okay, there's a lot there. We kind of talked about the prepping for different water on the last episode. I think that you got to get a lot of days and you got to put yourself in uncomfortable situations. You got to make sure that you're rolling a lot. And I'll tell you something that can really help you is to get in a BRAP or a Ripper or something like that and do a lot of squirting, a lot of flipping, a lot of coming over the back of your boat and get used to that. So that's not such a foreign place, because when you're running big whitewater, sometimes you got to take it down the meat and you're probably going to flip. And if you're used to that, that can help. Man, this is a tough one. I'm going to get back to this one on a later show, you guys, because when you talk about how you prepared for the Stikine, one-day descent, man, that's a whole story as well. So anyway, I'm going to get back to you on that one, Raul. But there's some great questions there, but there are a lot more. I mean, there's an hour show there that we need to break down all those points if we're really going to give you any value bombs.
It's like, can you succinctly explain to me how to be a badass paddler? Thank you. I'll go ahead and get off the line and listen to your answer.
I think the thing to do is to take your local run and start running it higher and higher and higher and higher and higher and go until you can't go anymore. And which also I think is one of the funnest things to do. It's just like picking a run. Like I feel like to run anything at really high water, it's really important to know the run really well and to kind of step it up a little at a time. And just doing that with your home run or any run that you really feel kind of passionately about, I feel like is a really fun project to take on,
I agree.
Like the Blackwater or, the Little White, just kind of inching it up a little at a time and just getting used to paddling pushy, scary, hard whitewater with consequence in an environment that you kind of know. I feel like that's good for anything,
Yep, I like that. And then we have a long one here from Simon Wyndham. I'm not going to get into this. I'm going to put this in the show notes so you can read it. It's a good email. He compares.
I think he's covering a subject that if we bring it up too much, people are gonna revolt.
Yep. So anyway, it's all about how you hold your paddle, feather, and length. And so I will put that back up there for everybody to read in the show notes. Finally, one more email here. This is from Sam Bernstein. Sam says, this is a somewhat embarrassing question for me to be asking, but the curiosity is killing me. And a couple of my other kayaking social media addicted boater friends have noticed that Ben Marr tags Lululemon men at a bunch of his Instagram posts. Do they actually sponsor him? Is he trying to get sponsored by them? If he is, have they used his media in any of their campaigns? Because that would be pretty funny, awesome to see one of our own break out, so to speak. That's from Sam Bernstein. So Sam, one thing that we do on the Hammer Factor is listen to our listeners, and so I went ahead and posed your question to the man himself, and this is what we got.
Sam Bernstein. What up, dude? This is Benny Marr. I am in Zambia, Africa, and John Grace just hit me up asking me to answer a question. Your email, and the start, your email begins with, this is an embarrassing question to ask. So I just have to say, you should have just asked me, because if you're embarrassed at all about this question, now it's being answered on a podcast instead of by me just answering you. Anyways, I have just suited up to go to the river, the mighty Zambambadubi. I am wearing Lululemon boxer briefs, hear that? Lululemon swim shorts, army print, and a tank top, also Lululemon. They are one of my sponsors. I love them very, very much. It's an amazing crew of people over there. Became instant friends with all the people I work with there. They have a few different tiers of sponsorship. They have elite ambassadors, which somehow I ended up on. It's amazing. You should see the proper athletes that they work with. And they have a couple other tiers that are, I don't really know what they are. So to answer your question, yes, I'm sponsored by Lululemon, and yes, they have used some of my stuff, but so far just on Instagram. And I am currently chatting back and forth with them for an upcoming film project, which is going to be shot at some point during January, February, or March. Yeah, I'm actually pretty pumped about it, looking forward to it, and just trying to dial in the location. So, back to you, John, or whatever, I don't know. Here's your... I'm just going to go to the river now, and I'll try to send this audio note to you.
And there you have it.
There we go.
Oh, Benny.
So Sam, the answer is Benny has broke out. He is sponsored by Lululemon. He's getting to work on a film project. So
I think Lululemon should kick us some cash for that segment.
I mean, is Lululemon that much bigger than Red Bull or I mean, who else? GoPro? I mean, something like that?
I doubt it. I mean,
I bet Red Bull's a bigger company than Lululemon.
yeah, I'd agree with that. I mean, Red Bull's sponsoring NASCAR and the whole 9 yards, so. Anyway.
I love seeing IR product and Red Bull videos, like in the airport and stuff like that. You know, those little kiosks that sell Red Bull, or not Red Bull, GoPro cameras.
You'd love to see IR there?
Yeah, because you can see our skirts, you know, in the kayaking segments that we have.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, that's killer.
I have to take issue with something Benny said there, which was, this isn't just a podcast.
That's right. I picked up on that too. It's very generic.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
yeah,
we'll have to talk to Benny about that. But he did get back to us in about 30 minutes when I posed the question. So that's pretty
I
cool.
got this in email form this morning from John Grace with the email body, "We are the fucking National Enquirer of kayaking."
Inquiring minds want to know. All right, real quick before we move on here, you got Max Blackburn lined up, Weld?
I'm trying to get him to talk about something. He has some complaints he wants to come on the air about.
Oh, I like that. But before we get Max on, you get him lined up in the background here. Boom, shake the room. I want to give a shout out to our mid-show sponsor, Caleva. Join Caleva in Mexico for a week-long whitewater kayaking trips. Great trips for all levels of boaters. Come down and see what's beyond the imaginary big, beautiful wall. Led by Tom McEwen, who has been exploring Mexico for 30 years. He's supported by one of our instructors like Dagger team member Bobby Miller, Liquid Logic team member Steve-O, Tom's nephew Ladies Man and Waka Bro, Eric Hansen. Explore the jungles, deep canyons, legendary waterfalls. Stick around for the Alsa Seca race. Trips are from class 2 to 4. Come for the waterfalls, stay for the tacos, and most of our trips are based out of the Mexican-run eco resort Aventurec, known for its great food, orange groves, and proximity to the best whitewater in Mexico. Check them out at their website, CALLEVA.org. So big thanks to those guys. And, you know, I was telling Lewis, I think before you got on, they've had several inquiries from our Hammer Factor ad, so that certainly makes us feel good. And
I mean, for all the listeners out there who dream of doing expeditionary paddling and listen to the show and hear all these great paddlers come on and talk about it, and they want to live that dream, this is the way to do it. No joke. This is the real deal.
Very well said. So go to CALLEVA.org. Big thanks to those guys. Awesome folks. Okay, guys, I know you're not going to be able to hear this or comment on it, but this is a really good interview I got from Tao. I'm going to go ahead and roll this right now before we continue the show. I'd like to introduce our celebrity guest for this episode of the Hammer Factor, former world record holder, extreme kayaking legend, pre-world's freestyle champion, and father of 2. Welcome to the show, Tao Berman. Can you
John,
hear me?
good to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, so
I can hear you just fine.
So what from that intro would you like to fill in, or is there anything that I left out?
Well, you did a pretty good job, like you said. I had a couple of world records back in the day. That was a long time ago for the highest waterfall I ever kayaked. Bottom line, when I look back at my career, I just really see myself as having been a kayaker more than a record holder or things of that, because it was just such a large part of my life for so long.
Before we get into some particulars of your paddling career, one thing that always stood out to me was your kind of the contrast of how you grew up. I've met your mom on a few occasions out at the the currently now GoPro Mountain Games. You are a pretty you're not exactly a hippie, but you were kind of raised that way on a hippie commune. Can you kind of elaborate on your upbringing and maybe the way that motivated you to be who you are right now?
Yeah, it's a great question. My mother came from a reasonably upper middle class family in Seattle, got out of college, traveled the world, spent quite a bit of time in Africa, and just decided she didn't want to live the orthodox all-American life. So she chose to move out to a mountain in eastern Washington where we no water, no water, no electricity, none of the modern day comforts. And I didn't know any different when I was born. But what I did know growing up is that if I wanted something, I had to create it for myself. If I wanted to go see a friend, we had no car. So I had to walk up the mountain that we lived at. I learned from a really young age that whatever I wanted, I couldn't expect it to be handed to me on a plate, so to speak. When I was in the paddling scene, there were a lot of paddlers that came from trust fund type backgrounds, and that was just never a part of my history. So what it really taught me when I got into paddling is that if I wanted to paddle full time, because I loved doing that more than anything, I had to create a way to make it pay, because I didn't want to spend 8 hours a day doing something I didn't enjoy. I wanted to paddle. And really, that was the motivating factor that made me decide I wanted to be a professional kayaker.
What do you think? How did that translate into your training and preparation and how you approached kayaking? Not just getting the funds to go kayaking?
It's difficult to say. I don't know how much of the approach I took to kayaking was a product of the way I was raised and how much of it was just a product of who I was going to be because of the genes I had when I was born. I'd like to think that a large element of the approach that I took to my career was really driven by the way I was brought up. And I was really brought up to have no sense of entitlement. So my goals were always very clear to me when I was a kid. I wasn't asking my mother or my father to buy me stuff because we didn't have any money. I mean, there were literally years that my mom made $4,000 that she had to feed her 3 kids. That money would go a long ways because there were no electricity bills or things like that. But I just learned that if I wanted something, I had to create it. And I knew that the approach that I took to being an athlete was going to definitely ruffle some feathers, shall we say, because I couldn't afford to, I suppose, rely on my father's money at the end of the day to make it to the next river. I had to create an income stream from paddling. So my goals were always very, very focused. Initially, when I got into the sport, I just loved paddling the hardest stuff that I could possibly kayak. And at the time, I didn't really realize I was out there pushing the edge of the sport because I wasn't paying attention to what other guys around the world were doing in their kayaks. I was just doing it because I wanted to test myself. And once I felt like I tested myself in that arena long enough, I was looking for a new challenge, and that's when I got into freestyle kayaking. At the time, a lot of my critics were saying, well, yeah, Tao's doing a good job running the hard stuff, but he won't live through the year or the year after that. And year after year, I was proving them wrong. And then I had a whole group of critics that were, well, or even very good in the creek boat, but he's not good at freestyle kayaking. And what my critics perhaps didn't realize is they were really my biggest benefactors because they gave me the motivation to prove them wrong. So I got into freestyle kayaking with the goal to win the biggest event of the year. And the year that I won the biggest event of the year was it was an off worlds year, so it was the pre-world championships. And I won that, and then I was looking for a new goal, and I decided I'd get into the extreme racing end of the sport. And my goal was to have a season where I was undefeated. And Pat Keller made that very challenging for me. He was a very fierce competitor, but I did have a year where I went undefeated there. And that was the evolution of what I did in the sport. And that's that I was constantly looking for a new challenge within the sport. And the reason I finally retired 6 years ago was because I all the boxes that I wanted to, or that really I was passionate about in the sport. And once I'd done that, I wanted a new challenge, and I didn't want to continue paddling because, well, it was just the easy thing to do. I wanted to find a new challenge. So I'm not sure that I exactly answered your question, but that's there it is.
Well, through that, extreme racing, extreme paddling, first ascents of a lot of drops, and winning a freestyle world championship, what would you consider your expertise in the sport is?
Not getting hurt. I spent almost 2 decades paddling and really pushing the sport for a good part of that, and I never had an injury. And that's probably my single greatest or proudest achievement because it shows that I used good judgment. Even when you could look at so many of the things that I did, look at them as an isolated incident and say, oh, God, that's just crazy. Well, you do that long enough without an injury, and it goes to show that there's some good judgment there. So I was very proud of that. I do remember, that being said, after winning the pre-world championships and the feeling of really the last 3 years that I trained so hard to finally have that result was immensely rewarding also.
So backing up a little bit to your when you were approaching sponsors, gaining sponsorship deals and whatnot, one thing that stood out to me, I was doing a film project for Teva Footwear at the time. Adam Druckmann was working there. And we were discussing some different, things that we were going to do in the future, and your name got brought up. And essentially, the way we were talking about sponsorships of various things, and I was listening to these sponsorship deals where other people were negotiating a certain number of shoes per year and another, they were trying to get a little cash for a trip and whatnot, and you were negotiating stock options and things that were totally outside of the box. How did you come up with your approach to getting sponsorships? Did you have a mentor in that? Did you read books? How did you figure out exactly what you wanted to ask a sponsor?
It's a really good question. My whole life, we all have different strengths and weaknesses, and one of my strengths my entire life has just been selling. I suppose even from a young age, I sort of understood the notion that when you're selling somebody on something, what you really need to be doing is thinking in terms of what they want, not what you want, because we all know what we want. But once we truly understand what the other person wants and we find a way to give it to them, then the sale's pretty easy. So to back up a little bit, when I decided to become a professional kayaker, I looked at what guys were doing in the sport ahead of me, what they were doing right, what I didn't think they were doing right. I'm not really that creative, but I'm very good at looking what other people have done, tweak it to try and improve upon it. Dan Gavir at the time was the generation before me, and he himself, but he never really made any money off of paddling. I knew that when I was 30, I didn't want to look back on the last 15 years of my paddling life and have nothing but great memories. Although that's incredibly important, I didn't want to then be lost and go through a midlife crisis at that age. I wanted to also be planning for my future beyond paddling, even though at the time it was so many years ahead. So what I did was I took a very different approach to being an athlete. I looked at myself really nothing more than a product. I had a billboard, and the more visible I was, the more valuable that billboard space would become. So everything about the approach that I took was different. To go back to what you were talking about with regard to Teva, sure, at the time, all the guys were asking for was really sandals for that contract. But if you're asking for sandals, you're not going to ever get more than sandals. And I sort of framed to Teva and to Adam the value that I could provide to their brand. And then I thought, well, perhaps if I take an unorthodox approach to why I perceive the value that I'm gonna be giving to that brand has value, I wanted to tie my compensation to the value that I thought that I could bring to Teva at the time. And I thought the best way to do that would be through discussing stock options.
And so essentially you had a performance marketing deal with them. You said, look, I'll take less knowing that I'm going to contribute, and in the long run I'll get more. Is that kind of...
That's right. That's exactly right. I mean, at the end of the day, any partnership should work out as long as the interests are mutually aligned. And the key to any good business relationship, in my opinion, is making sure that the economic interests are truly aligned well. And if they are, then you're going to be working in the same direction all the time. And if they're not, you're going to have mistakes. That's why when I look at the time that I spent with Eric being my videographer, Jock being my still photographer, we had structured relationships in place so that whenever I was doing something, they benefited, and vice versa. And that's why we were able to have this great relationship for really 10, 15-year span and never have any problems because our interests were truly aligned well.
There you go, Hammer Factor Nation. There's some value bombs. Make sure that your relationships add value to all parties involved if you want them to keep going. So you said you kind of thought of yourself as a billboard. The more numbers you could get, the more value you could get. Did you ever, there was that Tao Berman haters out there, and did you ever listen to what they were saying and feel like you were selling your soul out? Did you ever feel like you were selling out?
Well, I listened to what they were saying. I never felt like I was selling out. And here's the reason. Define what selling out means.
Well, it depends. If you're selling out your identity and what you believe in for money, that's what I would consider selling out.
I completely agree with you. As I stated earlier, what was most important to me when I decided to become a professional athlete, or I should say my motivations for it, was so that I can afford to kayak every day, because that's what I liked more than anything. My definition of a sellout would be somebody doing something for money when they don't enjoy what they're doing. And you see people that do that on Wall Street and in all spectrums of life all the time. I was doing exactly what I wanted to be doing, and I was getting paid for it. The only way I was able to get paid to do exactly what I wanted to do was to understand how I could create value to brands. And the moment I wasn't able to create value to brands was the moment they would stop paying me, and the moment I would have to get a real job and not be out paddling every day. So by your definition of the word sellout, by my definition of the word sellout, Absolutely not. I was living my dream, and I really wouldn't. Looking back on my career, I wouldn't change any of it. The reality is, a lot of the critics that I had, that being some of those from the Asheville crowd, I suspect that if they were put in my shoes and they had the opportunity to get paid to paddle every single day, perhaps they would have made more of the choices that I made. But keep in mind, John, for a moment, there's a difference between a paddler that knows that they'll never be good enough to be a professional kayaker, or perhaps they would be good enough, but they like their normal 9 to 5 job and they're happy doing that. Nothing wrong with that. But for me, I didn't want that. I wanted to be a professional kayaker. And there are certain compromises and sacrifices that one needs to make when they understand the value that they could provide to a brand.
Well, there's certainly no doubt that you made some things happen winning the pre-world competition and going undefeated. There's certainly some high points, but bring us to that low point. Bring us to the point when you thought, you know what, I'm going to get rid of this boat. I'm done with this paddle. It's time to do something different.
The lowest point in my paddling career, it's actually a great question. Nobody's asked me it. I was out at the Gorge Games back in, it might have been 99 or 2000, and I didn't make it through to the finals, and the only reason was just pure arrogance on my fault, on a mistake I made. And it was, I remember NBC was going to do a big feature on me at the finals, et cetera, et cetera. We were in the prelims. It was a long boat sprint to advance to the finals. The guys I was going against, I was much faster than. I knew it, and I went out ahead of them and then went to cut them off, thinking it would be more spectacular. One of them clipped the back of my longboat and spun me out. It was a very short dash, so I didn't have time to really spin all the way around and then make it to the finals. And it was 100% my mistake, and I learned a lot from it. Mm-hmm. I learned a lot from it, but it was an incredibly low point in my career because I knew that I had nobody to blame than my own arrogance. And that's why I didn't make the finals, and I learned from it, and I certainly never made that mistake again.
I remember that. I was at that event. I actually made it through to the finals, to that final 16, and we raced through BZ and then on to Big Brother and Little Brother. That was a good event. That was one of my I think that was my first West Coast race. I remember that.
And there you have it. And you smoked me.
Well, what is going back to what's the best advice that you ever received in regards to paddling and maybe life in general, but a lot of times those two kind of correlate?
I remember when I was about a year or two into my paddling career, not career, but just after having started a year or two into it, there was an older gentleman by the name of Randolph Pierce. We all called him RP. He was from the East Coast. He was a squirt boater. He was also a creek boater, and his technical skills were incredible. I mean, they were incredible. And I remember him talking about, before starting to run harder whitewater, learning to use pillows, learning to read the water, learning to use little currents and waves to surf across rocks in front of rocks that might have a pillow to get more momentum to traverse across the river, things like that. And at the time, it was so overwhelming because there are so many intricacies, as you know, to truly being a good whitewater paddler. Gravity dictates that you go down. When you go over a waterfall, you're going to make it to the bottom. But how you make it to the bottom and how you navigate your way through the rapid, well, that often is determined, or it's always determined, by how good you are and how well you understand whitewater and reading a rapid. And at the time, I remember just being overwhelmed by how much there was that I needed to learn. So the best advice I can give with regard to paddling is really to focus on the basics. Guys these days go from being a Class 1 paddler to a Class 5 paddler so much faster than we did back in the day. And just because you're running Class 5 doesn't make you a good whitewater paddler. To me, what is so beautiful is when you watch a guy paddle something incredibly difficult and make it look like Class 1. That's when you're truly a good paddler. But any fool can get through Class 5 and most of the time make it to the bottom, upside down, upright, or even pointed forward. It's really putting the time in to learn the rudiments so that when you start running Class 5, you can make it look like Class 1.
Now, one of our listeners here at the Hammer Factor sent us a link to your email with some curious underwear modeling photos. What can you tell us about those photos and that part of your career?
Thanks for that. Thanks for bringing that up, John. Yeah, that was a Rolling Stone photo shoot. They contacted me. They being Rolling Stone wanted to do an article or a feature on different extreme athletes, and the photographer, his name's David LaChapelle. For those in the whitewater world, which is probably all of you that don't follow photography, he's probably the most famous photographer ever. Certainly, he was at the time. He was shooting Madonna. He was shooting presidents, and if you look at his work, his genre is more on the sex appeal side. It's actually completely on the sex appeal side. And I knew I was in for something that I was gonna perhaps regret, given all the comments that would come from the paddling world. But I didn't think it would be right to go into his world and try and dictate the way he can shoot me. I knew that he perceived himself as an artist. He is an artist. You don't have to like his art, but at the end of the day, it was his shoot, and I was going to let him choose and do what he wanted. It's actually quite interesting. So I flew down to L.A. He did what nobody knows. In fact, you're the first person that's ever asked me this. But what nobody knows is that the first shoot I did, I was in Speedos jumping out of a swimming pool wearing a paddle. And that was a ridiculous shot. I flew home and I went, oh, my gosh, what have I done?
What? Now, what do you mean you were in Speedos? You were in Speedos wearing a paddle. What do you mean?
I was in Speedos holding a paddle, jumping from underwater, coming out of the water with this water falling off of my body, and it was ridiculous, and it was incredibly cheeseball. And I went home thinking, oh my goodness, what have I done? He called me that night and said, hey, you know what, Tao, we can do better with you. I've never done this. I've never scheduled a reshoot. When you fly back to LA, I had this tech campaign where they paid me $250,000 to create this backdrop. And this was back around 99. The tech company ended up going under during the dot-com crash, but they gave him the rights to use this backdrop. He remembered it after I flew home after the first shot and said, would you come back? I want to shoot you on a bed in underwear, but we want to impose this backdrop. And I said, all right, I'll come back to L.A. And that's the history to that Rolling Stone photo shoot.
Very good. So what is it? What are you most fired up with these days? In the sport of kayaking, if you've followed anything on social media or been paddling yourself, and in general, what has you the most fired up?
What has me the most fired up these days is dirt biking. When I got out of paddling, or I should say when I retired from kayaking, I was really looking for a new challenge, a new outlet that I could not be good at something so that I could see the learning curve again, because that's just such an exciting time in the progression of any sport. So I got into dirt biking, more the very, very hard enduro style that I'm into. And what I want to do these days is I want to go to Romania and race Red Bull Romaniacs, which is a 5-day race, kind of recognized as one of the hardest motor races in the world. That's what I'm really fired up about right now. That, and of course, spending time with my 2 young kids and living life in the gorge.
Tell me about your 2 young kids.
My son, Cole, is almost 5. He has a birthday in February. My daughter's 6.5. My daughter is as girly girl as you can imagine. And my son is exactly like me. He's just pushing the envelope. In fact, at 4 years old, I'd take him up to mountain bike. We do a downhill shuttle and do stuff that if I showed it to you, you wouldn't even believe a 4-year-old's doing this. And it's just like having a mini me to go out and explore the world and go on adventures. And it's just such a wonderful time with the kids and the age they are.
Yeah, fatherhood, having kids is it's a lot of work, but man, it's a special thing. There's no doubt about that.
It's incredible. I mean, really, we're creating, we have an opportunity to either create assets or liabilities in this world. And I want to spend a tremendous amount of time with my kids so that I can raise them to be productive members of society, to know, have to have good moral values and to have buddies to go out and do stuff with for the next bunch of decades.
I don't know. You've always been an inspiration to me, Tao. I've always, had a good time talking with you and whatnot. And I just want to say thanks for coming on the Hammer Factor. One thing that always struck me, I don't know, it's not strange or odd, but just always struck me was when you kind of did your exit and announced your retirement from competitive kayaking, you did that there was a video featuring you paddling a big wave, and that was kind of the announcement of your retirement. I had never seen you, kayak surf before in the ocean or anything like that. What made you choose that?
It's a really good question. I almost retired 2 years earlier. to backtrack on my career again, what I was initially incredibly passionate about was the extreme end of the sport. And once I'd done that long enough and achieved some of those goals and moved on to the freestyle kayaking side of things and achieved that goal, I needed a new challenge to. That's what I thrive on is challenges and setting goals. Once I won the freestyle championships, then it was the extreme end of the sport, the extreme racing end of the sport. Once I'd had that undefeated season, I almost retired then, but I was looking for a new challenge. And when Red Bull said they'd fund my big wave project, it gave me another challenge. At the time, I wasn't convinced that there was a kayak on the market that was really designed withstand the impact of a big wave if it were to land on me. So I had the opportunity to work with Randy Phillips to design a surf kayak that I thought would perform on really big waves and withstand the impact if I got crushed by one of the big waves. So ultimately, it wasn't so much as a marketing move as an exit piece from the sport. It was another challenge within the sport, something that I wasn't good at. I'd never done surf kayaking prior to sort of making that announcement. Rusty Sage and others were far better surf kayakers than myself. But what motivated me was that I wasn't good at it and that I thought I could surf really big waves. And it sounded like challenging. And it sounded like a very challenging endeavor that would take a couple years to complete. And once I'd done that, there really was nothing left in the sport that excited me from the perspective of something new that I hadn't already been doing for a long time in the sport. And that's why I knew it was time to – that's when I knew, to be honest with you, that's when I knew I'd be a sellout if I continued kayaking, because I'd be doing it for the wrong reasons. I didn't have the same motivation to try and improve, because the reality is at the time I retired, I was so good. It was a full-time job to not get worse. And I'm not saying I was the only one that was that good, but once you get to a point in your career where you're at, let's say, 97% of your potential, any incremental increase is so hard to achieve. When I got into kayaking or into dirt biking after I retired, I was so bad at it. I was at like 5% of my potential that every day I went out, I got better at it. So for me, it's seeing this learning curve for myself is incredibly exciting. And that's why I knew it was time for a new challenge, because I didn't have the same passion that I'd had for all those years when I was doing it every single day.
Well, I got a new challenge for you. It's the Green River Narrows Race. And this is a personal invitation from me for you to bring your whole family out. I'll cover your entry fee and come out and race the Green Race, Tao. Come on.
That's a challenge that sounds quite appealing. As fast as the guys are these days, I think I'd have to spend quite a bit of time in my kayak simply to not be embarrassed by it.
Well, I'm dealing with that every year, so welcome to the club.
So it'd be both of us. I'll take that under consideration. One of the regrets I actually have, John, when I look back at my career, and I always wanted to do this, it just never worked for whatever reason, never worked, was coming out and racing the Green Race. I felt like so much of the criticism, the Tao Berman criticism, was coming from that crowd that I thought it would be really fun to go and spend 10 days with that crowd, training with that crowd, and then at the time I certainly thought beating that crowd, but we'll never know. So that's one of those things that if I spend time in my boat next summer, I'd love to take you up on that, come out with my family. It's been years since I've seen you and a lot of the other Asheville crowd that I know. I would love that.
Well, it's an open invitation, and we'd certainly love to have you out here. Once you got out here, I'm sure you would. There's a lot more warmth than the few bad apples. You know how it is.
I know how it is. That being said, John, I really, really do appreciate that invite. I paddled the Green River one time. I remember I followed somebody down, which is always the most fun way to run a river, to not get out and scout, to know that the guy that's in front of you knows it so well, and you count on him having good lines that you could just read and run. And it was just such a memorable experience that I would love to be out on the East Coast paddling the Green River with you.
Well, before we close this interview, is there anything you'd like to for the Hammer Factor listeners to know, or any bits of nuggets or value bombs you'd like to drop on them?
Yeah, I think your questions have been good, and nothing comes to mind right now. Thank you for inviting me on the Hammer Factor.
Yeah, thank you. All right, we ready for the Blackburn?
He wants to come on. He has something to complain about. Max Blackburn is a super rep of the Northwest, as I keep saying. He reps IR product. And one of the things we can ask him about is, I think there's a notion out there, like if you're going to have you want to go ahead and bring him on, I'll lead into this. And I think there's a notion out there, like the best job to have in this industry is a sales rep. Like that is the best of the best. You could be a paddle sports sales rep because it's just constant paddling and hanging and, hooking people up with gear. And, you get to, it's basically like one big paddling lifestyle dream, right?
That's pretty much what I think it is.
I mean, Max, do you get that? Like people come up to you and they're like, "Oh, you rep paddle sports gear? That is the best. I'd love to do that." Do you hear that?
Wait a second, Max. What do you have there? Welcome to the Hammer.
Right, hold on.
Welcome to the Hammer Factor, first of all. But are you like?
You're looking seriously whacked out, my friend. What the heck is going on?
What are you on, my man?
He looks like a cult leader.
I was thinking more like Columbia
Maharishi Max.
Kingpin. Then
Do we need to call you back after you take care of something?
Yeah, this cat here that just won't leave me alone, so I've kind of given up and just let it have its way.
Seriously, that is. I don't even know where to start with this.
Definitely threw me a little bit here. All right, let's get back on point. So, Max, you're here to talk about the glamorous role of a sales rep. Is that right?
Oh, absolutely.
You've heard this before, right? The notion out there that a sales rep in paddle sports is like, that's the best job to get.
Yeah, it seems to be a reoccurring theme.
Do you want to set people straight on that once and for all? And you don't have to describe your personal experience. You can describe the generic paddle sports sales rep experience.
I mean, I think everybody's perception of it is pretty accurate. It's a lavish lifestyle, full of perks, benefits. Just fly around in my private jet, visiting his house, taking him out to dinner. I'm everybody's best friend. Everybody wants to know me.
They can't wait to take your calls.
What's the
and you don't need to go to college for it either. So don't listen to what everyone's telling you.
Max, what's your worst day on the job? What's the day that you just called somebody and they just threw an egg at you or slitted your tire or like give me one of those phone calls? Like,
it's going to come back to me. I know it is. But go ahead.
I got some I can talk about well too. So if you want to just get into that, Max, I'm willing to go there.
Oh man. Luckily there aren't too many days that are really that awful. I'd say the worst days usually involves something to do with a product not being what a customer expected it to be, whether it being our fault or theirs. If someone gets something that is significantly different enough than they expected, it does not make for a pleasant conversation. Especially if you've been telling someone that something is going to be a certain way for a long time, and then they get it in their hands and it's not that way. Can take a lot of explaining to make things right.
I can't quit looking at the cat. Has that cat ever bit you? It looks huge. Does that cat look huge to you guys?
Yeah, so last night we were checking this out and looking some information up, and we determined that this is I think it's called a Maine Coon cat, or at least part Maine Coon. I don't know if you guys have seen these things, but it's definitely worth a Google search.
Can you hold
These
it up
cats
for us?
are like bigger than most dogs. Some of them are like 4 feet long.
Where are you?
I'm at home.
This is compelling. This is just absolutely compelling.
You're I'm
in White Salmon, and
You are?
so I've already gotten about a dozen texts or calls today to go kayaking. It rained last night, so people are out running waterfalls, running the Little White, doing all kinds of fun stuff. The sun's out, so it'd be a particularly good day to be outside. But I'm here. I'm trying to sell some sweatpants and underwear.
You're living the dream. The right answer. So Max, you have.
Well, thanks for coming on the Hammer Factor.
Yeah, thank you. You've had some. We've talked about the Hammer Factor in the past, and you evidently you have some complaints about stuff we've been talking about.
Yeah, I've listened to most of the episodes, and I've heard my name come up a few times, and it seems like typically after my name comes up, then there's some sort of idea that is suggested came from me, or not even an idea. It seems to be stated as a fact. And I don't know that was necessarily true in every case.
You pinned laying treats on Evan and the closed grip on Evan.
Yeah, the closed grip is more of just kind of an idea. I thought that maybe that's where it came from. Which it sounds like he somewhat owned up to it. But, I've been seeing some other paddlers using the closed grip. I think, one that comes to mind is Andy Ole. I'd like to maybe, shift the blame over to Andy Ole's Hair Solstice. He's been using a pretty tight grip.
He's kind of off that, though, I thought.
Yeah, you might be right.
Do you have any other untruths?
Saw the light.
Let's try to start some controversy here.
Do you have any other untruths you'd like to share with our Hammer Factor listeners?
I do remember John backtracking, making sure that your listeners were aware that I had sent him a certain article from Outside Magazine, and kind of came across as me being an avid Outside Magazine subscriber, which I would like everyone to know. Not.
That is a black mark that needs to be addressed.
I actually had the article sent to me from someone else, and it seemed to be pertinent to the topic you guys were about to get into, so I sent it on over. And yeah, just want to make that clear. But one thing I do stand by is I definitely remember Evan using the term yeasted, and whether he remembers it or not, I fully stand by that proclamation.
Well, that's good.
I mean, it doesn't matter if he said it or not, because it's a term now. Like, I can't go anywhere without people being like, yo, let's go get yeasted. I mean, it's the truth, dude. I'm on trail runs. I was on a trail run the other day at this race in Chattanooga. I come to this bridge, and I'm crossing it, and these dudes are like, yeasted. I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about?
Good term.
I mean, that one's not going anywhere. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, it's taking hold on the East Coast.
I feel like this show has been kind of lackluster, and Max has really just fit right into that group.
The energy
This has been a low energy show.
The energy is just radiating from that cat. The cat's pretty amazing.
Well, I've been trying to get a hold of Weld for a couple of days here to talk about some actual business stuff, and gave him a call, and apparently he was recording Hammer Factor, so I figured it was the best way to get his attention.
Well, what do you want to talk about? Let's just talk about it right now. What's the problem?
I don't think it'd be very interesting to our listeners here.
How are the sweatpants going? Are they flying off the shelves, gangbusters?
Oh yeah, we're already we're looking at the next round, right? Well,
I love those things. That's the first product we've made that I actually like.
Can I get the credit for that idea, Weld, or are I going to max that over?
You can have whatever credit you want, okay. But you realize every product I make, someone comes up to me and says, "You're going to give me credit for that?" That happens every time.
And this is how you discredit. You sound like Donald Trump. Dude, it's like, I told you, I was like, dude, you need to make something like these pajamas. You remember I had those pajamas? I showed you pictures of them, and I was like, this is what I go to the green on Dawn Patrols. I don't even put on my gear.
You showed me MC Hammer wrestling pants is what you showed me, and that's not something we would ever make.
You know what I'm really excited for, Weld, is for you to go down to Peru and get bitten by a bunch of sandflies, and then you're going to come back inspired to bring back the board short pants.
All right, yeah, I'll bring us back. I'd love to. But Max will tell you the reality is we'll make them and stores won't buy them.
You know what?
Right? Is that correct?
I think it depends on what pants you're talking about here.
Like the pants I fixed for you, your ones you've had forever.
We are so off topic.
Like the ones that are just long pants that are board short material.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're good pants.
Well, thanks for that insight. Well, thanks for coming on, Max. This has been great.
They're Peru special, man. You're gonna get down there and you're gonna get just like molested by sandflies. You're gonna have like wish you had your board short pants if you don't have them.
Leishmaniasis.
Squirreled away from when you actually made them. And you're gonna have them tucked into your socks, and you're gonna be like, I'm gonna come home and start making these things again.
All right, I'd love to make a pant. I love making pants. Are the easiest thing to make in the world compared to a dry suit. I'd love to make something like that.
All right, let's make the pants.
Well, okay.
Well, Max,
it's like in a very weird place.
I'm not sure where to go with this show, but being that we got Max here, let's just go ahead and get in some rants and raves and end this before the show is officially.
Are you going to introduce Tao Berman, our guest?
I'm going to edit that in long before we're talking about this. So that's already happened to our listeners.
Max, do you remember where you were and what you were doing when you heard that Tao was retiring from kayaking? That's a joke.
I do, actually.
You do?
I do. Yeah, I believe it was at the Little White race.
I was sitting with a cat in my lap.
The sun radiating behind my head, creating a heavenly glow. My hair was standing more or less straight up on end.
Do you think Red Bull sent Tao like a gold watch as like a retirement present, or you think he gets like a pension?
Do you remember how he announced his retirement, Max?
I believe I just overheard him telling a friend of mine that he wasn't racing because he was retired. And, I almost fell over. It was so shocking. It's kind of crushing, too. It's a childhood hero of mine. It's just something I never thought I would hear. Just can't mentally prepare yourself for something like that.
Well, we're gonna have to have you back on the show again, Max.
Dude, we are so off the rails with this, Max. I mean, we are off the rails.
All right.
Dude, let's keep Max on and let's get into some rants and raves because once Max is gone, it's like a whole new.
Max is gonna be like, I want to rave about hot tea. I love hot tea.
God, the energy is infectious. I don't know what to do. I'm raving about Max Blackburn coming on the Hammer Factor with this giant cat.
Just driving the show to like a dead, like a gigantic beat.
This is like hanging an elephant in Irwin's at sea, man. There's no going back.
Wow. All right.
I did get into a conversation the other day about a town that's being
what?
Apparently it's being terrorized by an elephant.
Who?
Somewhere in Africa, but there are laws that prevent them from doing anything to this elephant. And I told the person who was telling me the story about it, and he was very interested in the story of Mary.
Well, I think the Hammer Factor T-shirt should have an elephant on the front of it somehow, with holding a paddle. With hands very close to, or whatever it has for hands very close together.
Ooh, I like that. Mary's like hanging, holding the paddle close together.
I don't want to get too morbid here,
Bent shaft.
Yeah, no hanging elephants, man. I can't wear a shirt with a hanging elephant.
Oh, man.
Right.
Max got out from
that
under
was,
the cat.
That was some anonymous boat review guy level tackling.
Dude, this is the most off the rails the show has ever been,
We should. I want to apologize for the show right now. The show packed nothing.
We'll come back in 2018 with some new ideas.
Nah, man.
Seriously.
You guys aren't hearing the Tao interview. It's really good.
All right.
Let's do some rants and raves with Max. Let's put him on the spot. Max, what's your rant or rave?
I got a rant.
Let's hear it.
I got a rant about being somewhat accosted by a surfer the other day in California.
Were you in the ocean?
I just gotten out of the ocean. I'm going to leave out some details here. I don't think it's necessary for people to know exactly where this happened, but yeah, there were 3 of us in the ocean. We just surfed some waves in.
On kayaks?
Two of us got out. One was still surfing.
You were in kayaks?
We were in kayaks. We were in sea kayaks. We'd been out rock gardening. And then there were some nice waves near the beach, so we surfed them in. And one of us chose to keep surfing for a while. And while 2 of us were watching him continue to surf, this guy just ran up on us really quick and was visibly angry. He was shaking. He was so angry. And he had
Was he in the water?
No,
Did
no.
he come out of the water?
No. He had parked on the road.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't see him until he was like right up behind us. And he came over to us and started asking us if we had a permit to be here, and was asking like if we were allowed to be teaching classes here. I guess he thought that it was a lesson that was happening. And we quickly explained to him that this wasn't a lesson. We were just out playing. I was visiting. I was in town, hanging out with some friends, just having some fun in the ocean. And then these friends of mine, they have a kayaking school where they do both whitewater and some sea kayaking instruction. And he was very quick to claim that they had been getting rich off of kayaking in this spot and teaching lessons all summer. I believe his words were, "You guys are out here making a ton of money all summer without going through the proper legal procedures, and I just can't have it." And he was, as we realized later, he was recording with his phone, recording the conversation. And I think, you can just tie this into a general, lack of courtesy with people with opposing views, approaching each other in ways that you're just not going to get a good response. And yeah, I don't know whether you're a surfer confronting a kayaker, or, Republican or Democrat approaching the other side. Like, there's just a way to approach a conversation in a reasonable, respectful manner. If you're looking to have any sort of decent discourse with the other person, and this person was just coming at it from such a unreasonable place. It was just kind of surprising, shocking to see. It was very unfortunate.
Just kick his ass.
Having a good time.
Did you have the cat with you?
I don't know. It's not, I don't do a lot of sea kayaking, so I don't experience this surfer versus kayaker thing very often. I've, heard about it, but yeah, it was just a little frustrating to experience. It was unfortunate. We're all just out there trying to have fun. I think we should be able to get along and settle our differences, or at least have a reasonable conversation.
Thank you for that, Max. Would anybody else like to follow that up with a rant or a rave?
Oh, man.
You might just want to cut that one out.
There's no way I'm cutting it because this is going to give us banter for at least half of next year. It's called the Max Blackburn effect.
I apologize to everyone out there.
Oh,
All right, I'm going to rave about getting on a plane tomorrow morning and going and flying to 12,000 feet, hanging out in Cuzco. Same elevation as base camp at Everest.
Badass, dude. I'm so jealous.
it's more fucking like it.
That is a really good one.
Are you
Lewis?
gonna rave about it, or that's it?
That's it.
Um,
Pretty weak.
yeah, this is the worst show ever. I'm gonna rave about bike share in DC. Man, like when they first started with the bike share, I thought it was just like a stupid idea. Like, I don't know, it's like who doesn't just, if you want to ride a bike, just buy a bike, right? Like, why do you need to have like a bike share? But man, I like coming to town and there's like these stations and it's $2. You can rent a bike, you can go wherever you want, and it is like by far the fastest, most pleasant way to get around in downtown DC. It's flat. It's like there's so much fucking traffic. Like everything would take forever in a cab or walking, and you can just like cruise across town like nothing, just like ripping through traffic.
Those are all over Asia.
Pretty sweet.
Very cool.
I was dubious at first, but I was wrong. Bike share, it's good.
Bike share, that's a good one. Well, thank you for listening to Hammer Factor 39, the worst one yet.
Seriously, thank you. I want to give you a special thank you to everyone who lasted this entire show, because that is...
Maybe we are done. Maybe this really is the last episode.
Well, all right. Hammer Factor out.